Welcome. And we'll start off with Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Okay.
And here we go with the share. And we're on to a new subject today. Relatively new subject. It's not a completely new subject because we are still dealing with priests and the limitations they have. And in this case, though, we are going to be talking, I believe, about the animals that are the priests themselves, and then subsequently the animals. In other words, the idea is to try to make it as perfect as possible. And while I know that generally speaking, we don't necessarily seek perfection, the truth is that there are places where if it's substandard, we're not interested, and we, in fact, would reject it. You go to a concert, for example, and if the person isn't competent, I'm not saying you're going to boo them, but certainly you're not going to go back to that concert, and you're going to feel that somebody took your money for nothing, if in fact it's a professional individual. And I think that goes for quite a number of situations like that, where there is a sense of standards and to be able to make those standards. And I was thinking, for example, if you're dancing or acting, the directors can be very, very hard on you. And I also remember Susie, my wife, telling me about going to art class, where if they presented something, they could have spent hours on something, and if it was considered substandard, the teacher could just tear it up. It's sometimes being that tough is important in terms of developing better standards and working harder. So just interesting. But being able to, of course, handle criticism is so important as well. So there's a reality show that we watch which involves fashion. Very, very tough. Standards are very high. Well, Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe Emor. So Hashem spoke to Moses to say, Daber el Aharon Lemor, speak to Aaron, saying, Ish mizaro, a person, a man of his seed, of his offspring. Excuse me, mizar acha, forgive me, I read it wrong. A man of your, so he's speaking directly to Aaron, a man of your offspring, the Dorotam, according to their generations. So this means in perpetuity, essentially. Asher yeh v'omom, in whom there is a blemish. Lo yikrav, he shall not draw near. Lahakriv lechem elokav. That is in order, we're talking specifically of what we mean by drawing near, and that is to offer up the lechem. We know that lechem generally is translated as bread, but as Rashi is going to tell us, that word lechem can also mean food, or a meal of his God. So in other words, there's going to be a definition of what kind of blemishes we are talking about that render a priest unable to from offering up, from ministering at the altar. So Rashi here, lechem Elohav, the bread of his God, ma'achal Elohav. So he's saying the food of his God. Kol seudah kruya lechem, and we read this yesterday. Every meal, a seudah is a meal, is also known as a lechem, as in the book of Daniel, we mentioned this too. Avad lechem rav, he made a great feast. He made a feast, lechem rav, a great meal. Now, ki chol ish asher bo mum, because any man in whom there is a blemish, lo yikrav, and now he goes on to explain what are we talking about, shall not draw near. Ish iver, a man who is blind, or piseach. Piseach means a limp that he has, or charum. So charum is a word that we have to look at the tradition to understand, but it means flat-nosed, or sarua, or who has limbs that are not of equal length. So we're talking about quite serious defects here, that or blemishes here. It's going to go on with others as well. Let's just take a look at the Rashi. For every person in whom there is a blemish, lo yikrav, should not draw near or should not offer the sacrifice. Einodin sheyikrav. Okay, so it means here the way Rashi's dealing with this is trying to explain what appears to be a redundancy, and it's as if this sentence is saying it doesn't. The sentence is justifying the statement that was made before, in the sense that einodin sheyikrav means it doesn't make sense. That's what it's getting across, that it doesn't make sense that someone who's blemished and subsequently a blemished object should in fact be making gifts in this kind of context. For example, and he gives an example in the prophet Malachi chapter 1, Hakrivuhu na lepachtecha. So he upachtecha. Malachi is talking about the way in which the Jewish people at his time are worshiping and doing it in ways that are objectionable. And basically part of the style of Malachi is that they'll say, well, what's bad about that? And Rashi here is, Malachi is saying to them here, okay, he's accusing them of offering up blemished animals on the altar. And he's saying to them, why don't you take that blemished animal and give it as a gift to your governor? See how happy it's going to make him. Because, of course, there's an insult. When you give someone something that is blemished, then it's the connotation of the gift is very different than when you give someone something that is as perfect as you can make. It's part of showing respect and love at the same time. So gift giving is actually a very subtle way of communication. And as I said, if you give someone something that's secondhand or whatever, of course, it depends on the general context of what you're doing. But if you're trying to make the gift something to demonstrate your love and your respect for that person, you don't give them blemished objects. Best example you had was Cain and Abel, where the implication is that Cain simply gave whatever came at hand. The amount of trouble in a way that you take in making the gift is part of it as well. And there's a famous story about Stanley in Africa, that when he left, there was a person there who brought him a carved piece of wood. And Stanley at the time knew that they didn't grow that kind of tree in the locality and that it was grown 100 miles away. And he said to the person, he said, where did you get this? This is something you had to walk 100 miles to go get the wood to make this carving. And the person said to him, walk, part of gift. So we do have,
Yeah.
So Charum, in Bechorot, in the tractate Bechorot, page 44, it says Shechot Mo. That is the Chotem means, it could mean his, I'm trying to think exactly how to describe it, but it's like the bridge of, I think it's like either the nostrils or the bridge of the nose. Shakua is sunk in, bein shtei ha'einayim, between the two eyes. Shekochel shtei einav ka'achat. So in other words, it's closed in, and literally it means he can paint his two eyes in one. In other words, when he's putting mascara on or eyeshadow or something like that, he can paint both eyes in one brush stroke. Sarua, she'echad me'evarav gadol mechavero. So it's saying that one of his limbs is bigger than the other limb. Eino achat, or one eye, gedola ve'eino achat krana, or one eye is smaller than the other. So this is the basically point about the word sarua, or, and he gives another example, shoko achat, one of his thighs, arucha mechaverta, is longer than his other thigh. So sarua means that kind of blemish. We are not done. Here we go. Or ish asher yevo shever regel, or a man or person who has a broken leg, so a limb that is broken. And we'll see what Rashi has to say about that, or shever yad, or whose hand is broken. Let's take a look. Okay, so there's no Rashi on this. I had read elsewhere that this here, we're talking essentially about a temporary kind of situation. And the question is asked in halacha, well, what if it heals? And the answer is that the wording here, the way it's worded, suggests that if he has it, then he can't do it. But if in fact it heals and he no longer has this problem, he's fine. He can go ahead and perform the normal services of a priest. We're going into further possible blemishes. O igibain. So again, these words are not used very commonly. They're not common words. I think the Safaria translation had, I'm not sure, let's take a look. It could be, yes, this is, I believe, Rashi's interpretation. And I think this could be Safaria's translation. Quite a bit of difference here in the translation, so you can see this, right? So Rashi translates it as heavy eyebrows, another possibility. And I think this is the modern use of the Hebrew, hunchbacked or duck. The translation in Sfaria is a dwarf, but Rashi has a different, you'll see, has a different translation, or tavlul be'eno, or a tavlul in his eye. It's a kind of growth. Or garav, a boil scar. Or yalefet, or scurvy. These are obviously different kinds of skin afflictions. Or maroach ashach, or, and this has to do with if his testes are crushed. So all kinds of ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, thank you. Maruach Hashech, correct. I mispronounced it. Let's take a look at Rashi, quite a bit of Rashi on this particular section here. Okay, giben. And this is some kind of French words, or maybe, Lauren, do you have an English spelling of this word?
Yeah, Sourcils, or C.
Sourcier,
No,
or something?
Sourci, Sourcils.
Oh, yes.
Sourci.
I'm sorry, I thought there was an E afterwards. Okay, sur C, you can kind of see how it's spelled there in French, in this old French, and it says Eugen Broinen, and that would mean heavy eyebrows. Eugen, eyes, Broinen,
It would be
Eugen.
above the lashes.
Yeah, right. So shegavine enav, he says in the Hebrew, he's saying that the lash, that's right, the lashes of his eyes. I think I said eyebrows. It's
No, it is eyebrows.
Okay.
Above the lashes are the eyebrows, and that's what sourcil means.
Ah,
above the lashes.
okay. Oh, I
so
see.
the eyebrows.
Okay. All right. So he says gvine enav. So the gvine enav have to be the eyebrows, the brows of his eyes. Sa'aran, their hair, aruch v'shochev, are long and lie down, and literally it means they lie down. So, or dak, and this word dak, bechorot, and in the word bechorot, the tractate Bechorot, page 39, sheyesh lo be'enav dok, that in his eyes there is something that is called a dok, which I looked up the translation. Jastrow says it's a withered spot in the eye, and also, or like there's a web across his, I imagine, across the pupil. Shekorin tie. You'll have to help me with the
A cataract?
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
Chabad calls it a cataract, and it says
Interesting.
the eyes over his eyes is a membrane, but as far as then those words, it actually lists 4 of them.
Interesting.
The first one is tail, T-E-I-L-E.
That's
The
this
second-
word here. Yes.
The second one, tell, T-E-L-E.
Yes.
Then toil, T-O-Y-L-E.
Yes.
And then it, for some reason, repeats T-E-L-E. So I'm wondering
Mm,
if
mm,
that's a mistake.
yeah.
Why
Could be.
have that twice?
Right. So the Yiddish is ein, a dinnis, a thin gewebt, a thin web. So it does sound like a cataract.
Mhm.
Emor, and here in Yeshayahu, in Isaiah, Hanoteh Kadok. It's referring to the heavens, I believe, spread out like a web. Oh, and we're going back into explaining the text, Tavlul, right? All these words require explanation because they're just uncommon words and they're describing very specific disorders. Davar satavlul, he says there's a derivation from davar hamivalbel, something that confuses, right? Et ha'ayin, the eye. So something that makes eyesight, problematic. Kagon, so for example, he says, chut lavan, a white thread, hanimshach min halavan, that goes on from the white part of the eye. Uposek besira. And I think what this means is that it divides up, it crosses over in some way or another. Shehu agul, and it is around. Hamakif et hashachor. So this is the iris. This is the iris that surrounds the dark, that is the pupil. Shekorin prune. That is a modern French word as well, which means, I think, the iris.
It says here prunelle.
Okay, all right. So this is like prunilla or prunilla.
And I think, and it's referring to the pupil according to
It
this.
is really? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. But I think that he says this is a makif. Makif would be to surround. But it could say that the shachor, the dark part, the pupil, is called the as you said, the prunelle. So,
That's what it says here. Yeah.
well, here we go. Der Augenapfel, the apple of the eye. So that would be the pupil. Eugenstern, or the star of the eye. Eugen, of course, is eyes. V'hachut hazeh, and this thread, posek et ha'ogel, and this thread splits up, divides the ogel, this round part. V'nischnas, so here he does mean the iris, I believe, that is the circle. V'nichnas
Yes.
b'shachor, and it enters into the dark, into the pupil. The Targum Tavlul, and the Aramaic translation of the word Tavlul, chiliz, is the word chiliz, lashon chilazon. It's a
Mine, by the way, says tivulal, as
really?
in, and then it says as in, it looks like chilis,
Yes.
derived
Okay.
from
Right,
chila,
chiliz. Right.
zone,
So
yeah.
there's the word tevalul, and I said tavlul. So I'm
Tivulal,
doing a
yeah.
great job today of mispronouncing words. Tevalul. Thank you. Lauren, thank you for catching me.
It says tivulal.
Right, but here it's tevalul here.
Huh.
So let me look at the Rashi
yeah.
here and see if it would be spelled a little differently. Okay, so here, look at this: Taf Bet Lamed Vav Lamed, and this is Taf Bet Lamed, and this is an U sound here, Lamed. So, I want to go then with the way it's pronounced, that he's referring back to the word in the text, which is, at least here, the way it's spelled is Tevalul.
Yeah, actually, now when I'm looking at the Hebrew, part of the Rashi, it does say it that way, but in the English translation of the Rashi, it lists the Hebrew characters differently. So I would trust Tivalul.
Right, and it could be that again, it's a misprint. So the translation of it is chiliz, lashon chilazon. It has the same meaning as the word chilazon, shehu domeh letolat, because the chilazon was this worm that could split rocks. If you place this worm on a rock, it would split. This is in the Agadic material. In other words, because you couldn't actually wield iron on the rocks on which the temple was built. You couldn't, because iron is a symbol of warfare. So they have this story of the chilazon, that's the way they did it. So yes, go ahead.
There was Tales of Solomon by, I think,
exactly.
Freehoff, that I must have read 900 times.
Yes.
Wasn't it called the Shamir?
Yes, you're right. You're right. I think it was, well, maybe I'm wrong. I'm making a lot of mistakes today. Now I'm thinking.
But it does say it's a worm.
Yes, but now I'm thinking that the chilazon is a
different worm.
That it is, that's what you get the blue from. I was confusing it with the
Oh, that would make sense with this word.
yes. The chilazon, forgive me. You get the prize today, Judith. Thank you for catching my error. Right. The chilazon was what they made the tchelet from. That's what. And the shamir was the worm that they used to split rocks. Thank you. Thank you for making sure I didn't make that mistake. All right. So let me keep going. Find the place. Right. It is a worm, oto hachut. That thread looks like a worm. V'chein kinuhu chachmei Yisrael, and so the sages of Israel termed it b'mumei habachor, amongst the imperfections, all right, or the blemishes of a bachor. So if in fact, so the Torah says that if a firstborn animal, which was supposed to, one of the firstborn animals that was supposed to be dedicated to the temple, had certain blemishes, they were not offered as a sacrifice. Chilazon nachash, this is inav. Oh, sorry. Achash elav. This is a lamed. Sorry.
Mine says enav.
Enav. Thank you. Sometimes you can see. Sometimes a lamed has that little part not printed, and so it's hard to tell. So right. So nachash would be a snake, right? The snake of his eye. And again, this is why it's in the tractate Bechorot, because it's discussing blemishes that would render an animal unfit to offer as a bechor. Garav v'yalefet. So these words, garav v'yalefet, minei shchinhem. He says they are types of boils. Garav, so the case of a garav, zo hacheres refers to, so cheres refers to like clay, hacheres, shchin, right? This is a dry boil. Hayavesh mibifnim, which is dry on the inside, umi bachutz, and outside as well. So this would be a dried boil. Yalefet hi chazazit. So he says a yalefet is like a chazazit hamitzrit, Egyptian lichen. V'lama nikret yalefet. So why is it called? Why does it have this word yalefet to describe it? Shemelapefet v'holechet ad yom hamita, because it clings to the skin and continues to do that until the day of death. It's a permanent blemish. Vahu lach mibafchutz, and this is one that is wet, moist on the outside, v'yavesh mibifnim, and it's dry on the inside, uv'makom acher, and in another place, korel lagarav shchin, he calls the garav shchin halach, shchin halach mibachutz, v'yavesh mibifnim. It calls a garav, a boil, which is moist outside, v'yavesh, and dry on the inside. So that's as opposed to the yalefet. I imagine. I'm looking to see. Yeah. So the question of how to define the garav and the yalefet. Shinemar, so based on this, is in the book of Deuteronomy in chapter 28, it says, Uva garav, uva cheres, because there where it's talking about the plagues that are going to occur to the people if they don't follow the Torah, it uses the term garav and cheres. And cheres, we know, has to do with like pottery. Keshesamuch garav etzel cheres. So he's saying now the way you understand is when the word garav is placed next to the word cheres, korei leyalefet garav. In that case, the yalefet is also called a garav. Ukeshehu samuch etzel yalefet, but when the word garav is, I'm looking to say, when it's next to the word yalefet, korei lacheres garav, then the dry boil is called a garav. Kach mefurash.
Well, it says when the word, I think it says when the word cheres is placed next to yalefet, you call it a garav.
Let me look at what the Rashi said.
That's the translation here.
Oh, I see. Okay, sorry, you're okay. So here, okay, korei leyalefet garav. And when this word, we're talking about the word garav, right? When the word garav, the garav.
The first one is when the word garav is placed next to the word cheres. The second one is when the word
garav,
yalefet, is placed next to cheres. That's what mine says. And then that's also called a garav.
Okay.
I could
so here's why I'm saying what I'm saying. Here's the word garav, and then there's the pronoun referring, and generally I would think the pronoun would refer back to the closest reference. So when it is placed next to yalefet, korei lacheres garav.
Well,
so maybe it's saying the word cheres. Yeah, go ahead.
What mine says is, however, and this is after when, okay, so the first sentence is cheres near garav. Then it says, however, when it is mentioned alongside yalefet, then cheres, then cheres is called garav.
Right, that I would agree with that.
Oh, okay, I get you. So it's like,
no, I was wrong too. I was wrong. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, so it's referring ultimately to the word cheres and where it's placed. Right. Kach mefurash bechorot. So this is the way it's explained in the tractate Bechorot. Let me see. We have a little bit more just to finish off here because this is
crushed testicles.
Yeah, let's get this. Of course, we don't want to miss that, right? Maruch hashach lefi hatargum. So according to the Aramaic translation, meris pachadin. So that's the way it's translated in the Aramaic. The pachadin are the testicles. Maris would be crushed. Shepachdav merusasim. His testicles are crushed. Shebeitzim shelo, and literally it says the eggs, its eggs, right, are ketutin, are pounded, right? That they're.
Yeah, mine says the sinews are knit together.
Okay.
Well, but either way.
So maybe they're understanding pachadav as sinews. Is that how they're translating? Oh, wait, here we go. No, sorry. I look at it. Here's my translation. Look at that. So he says, he gives the example in Job chapter 40, where it says gidei are sinews. Gidei pachadav yisorgu.
Yeah, and mine says pachidav.
Okay. It could
But you
be.
may be right.
No. Okay, they could be right. There's no yud here, which is why I didn't say bechida. If
Yeah.
there had been a yud there, I would have. So it
I
says,
got you.
so the verse in Job is the one that says, the sinews of his stones are wrapped together.
Mhm.
And that's where we're going to leave it. So basically, we're talking all about this. Yeah.
So they had to check for all that.
Yeah, I imagine they did. Well, they were guys looking at each other, but there's also a sense, of a medical way in which to look at these things. So I'm going to stop the share. And we can stop the recording, and we have a minion.